Okay, welcome again. Thank you everyone for joining the Moving Our States Off Fossil Fuels webinar. In just a minute, we're gonna dive in and hear more about what's going on in some key states and key fights around the country. I'm Saskia Herrick with Food and Water Watch, and we've got a great lineup of speakers with us tonight who I'll introduce in just a second. Thanks again for joining us, and we wanna make sure also to thank our allies and partners who've shared this webinar with their networks. We know Progressive Democrats of America, People Demanding Action, National Nurses United, People's Action, a lot of other groups as well. So thank you so much for sharing this with your folks. And before that, just want to do a quick orientation if you're joining us on Zoom. This is good to mention if you're not on screen share right now and you're calling in, we highly recommend that you join by the screen share by clicking the link that hopefully was an email that you received. We're here on video and we're going to be sharing slides throughout the webinar. So just be a good experience to kind of hear and see everything getting shared. And we're keeping everyone on mute. We've got a lot of folks on the call just to cut down on the background noise, but we will be taking questions. So if you have a question at any point in the presentation, you can click the Q&A button that you should see at the bottom of your screen. And again, we've got a lot of folks, but we'll try to get to many of those as we can at the end of the webinar. And you probably do see a button for raise your hand, but we won't be using that during tonight's webinar. So again, if you've got a question, the Q&A is the place to ask it. If you've got any technical issues, if you're on the phone and you want to kind of send your question in and you can't type it in, you can email us at help@fwaction.org, and I'll spell it out. It's help, HELP, at F as in food, WACTION.org. And so with that, let's dive in. So I'll kick it off with some introductions and then I'll pass it off to our panelists for tonight. I'll start with Michelle Merkel, who's the co-director of Food and Water Justice, the legal arm of Food and Water Watch. And she works to develop and pursue legal strategy on the critical issues facing our environment, communities, and most precious resources. Michelle has previously also worked to help develop legal strategy on issues like livestock production, municipal sewage, and protecting water resources. Tonight, I know we had shared that Delegate Shane Robinson of Maryland was supposed to join us, but unfortunately we heard within the last hour that Delegate Robinson had his subcommittee meetings run late into the evening and he will not be able to join us. Sorry for the late news here. We know he really wanted to be on the call with us tonight. But stepping in for him will be Food and Water Watch's own Mitch Jones. Mitch is a senior policy advocate here at Food and Water Watch, and he represents our organization in Congress and in Maryland on a range of issues, including renewable energy issues and other state issues. He's going to add some great perspective to our panel tonight. So thanks for joining us, Mitch. And we've got Representative Joe Salazar, who's serving his third term in the Colorado House of Representatives, and as state rep has focused on legislation to protect communities and Colorado's environment, and serves as the vice chair on the Judiciary Committee. And he's also a practicing attorney focusing on environmental employment law and civil rights law. So thanks so much. And we've also got Janet Curley with us. Janet was a member of the Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Committee at Holy Name of Jesus, St. Gregory's Church on the Upper West Side in Manhattan for over 15 years, and is currently serving on the steering committee of the Metro New York chapter of Global Catholic Climate Movement. And in both capacities, she's been involved in efforts to increase awareness of sustainable living, including food, water, and energy issues. So thank you so much, Janet, also for being here. And thank you all for the work that you do every day. So with that, I'm gonna pass it off to Michelle Merkel from Food and Water Watch to kick us off.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here. All right, great. Thank you. So thanks, Saskia. Good evening, everyone. As Saskia said, I'm Michelle Merkel, and in addition to co-directing our Food and Water Justice Program, which is the legal arm of Food and Water Watch, I also co-direct the Climate and Energy Program, and I want to thank you as well for joining us on the call tonight. I'm going to speak to you this evening about why a rapid transition to 100% clean energy is essential to protecting communities and our environment. And I'm going to briefly discuss the 4 bills that have been or will be introduced this year to set states on a path towards 100% renewable energy by 2035 or sooner. Science has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that decades of burning fossil fuels has already caused significant climate change, and this has led to an increase in the frequency and severity of major natural disasters. So we saw that last year with hurricanes in Puerto Rico and Texas and Florida, and the wildfires that rage in California. And if we don't take aggressive forward-thinking action now, the storms, the droughts, the floods will get worse. And this is going to mean more homelessness, more water contamination, more food shortages, and many more lives lost. So the urgency of our fight is critical. Today, global average temperatures are 1 degree Celsius higher than before the Industrial Revolution. And in 2015, the nations of the world met in Paris at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and agreed that we need to prevent the planet from warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, right, to significantly reduce the risks and the impacts of climate change. In order to do that and have a 2 out of 3 chance of avoiding this catastrophic 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in temperature, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, found we could only emit additional 400 gigatons of carbon dioxide after 2011. So that's our carbon budget. And based on that budget and what we've emitted since 2011, we need to reduce our annual emissions by 20% each year to get to near zero by 2035. We also need to make significant progress over the next decade in particular to avoid the worst of climate chaos. A recently leaked report from the IPCC just last week says that holding temperatures below 1.5 may already be out of reach. We have no time for delayed action or weak policies. And as climate pollution accumulates and as global warming increases, we also roll the dice with so-called tipping points, which could result in potentially irreversible warming impacts and effects. So in order to tackle climate change, Food and Water Watch has been pushing for some key components in renewable energy plans and bills. First, there needs to be an aggressive timeline. As I just explained, we need to get to 100% renewable energy by 2035 or sooner if possible. Second, there needs to be a truly clean definition of renewable energy that includes solar, onshore, offshore wind, geothermal, ocean tidal sources. A lot of the state's renewable energy portfolios include what we consider to be dirty sources of energy, like nuclear power, like natural gas, or biomass. Third, there needs to be a plan for a just transition. And for that transition to be successful, it must work for everyone, including transitioning workers from jobs in the fossil fuel industry to living wage union jobs. We need jobs training, relocation assistance, and a commitment that environmental justice communities are protected in our state and national energy plans. And as we develop these plans, there must be meaningful participation of the communities most affected at the outset of plan development. And finally, carbon pricing, such as carbon taxes, cap and trade programs like RGGI are only going to encourage continued fossil fuel extraction and divert attention from real climate solutions. So we don't think that those market-based systems have a place in our renewable energy future. Instead, we need to use existing laws to require mandatory pollution reductions from our existing fossil fuel industry as we transition away from fossil fuels altogether to renewable energy. So here's the good news. We have the technical know-how for the transition, but we really need to overcome the political barriers that stand in our way, which at times may seem really insurmountable given that we have a climate denier in the White House backed by corporate money. But despite this power, the most important decisions around energy are being made at the state and local level, where the administration has much less influence and where we can win. And as Food and Water Watch has learned in other campaigns, if you start transformation at the state and local level, it will eventually also move federal policy. So tonight we talk about a couple of exciting things happening at the state level. As Saskia said, unfortunately, Delegate Shane Robinson couldn't be with us tonight. He's the floor leader on a couple of bills that are being heard. But we have Mitch Jones, who's going to talk about the Maryland 100% Clean Renewable Energy and Equity Act, which was introduced this year. The hearing is on March 5th. It represents an exciting step towards ending reliance on fossil fuels in Maryland and incentivizing in-state generation. And Mitch is leading the renewable energy program development at Food and Water Watch, so he's going to be the perfect person to talk about that bill, and worked very closely with Shane to develop it. We're also fortunate to have Representative Joe Salazar with us tonight, who's going to talk about the need to move Colorado off fossil fuels. But in addition to Maryland and Colorado, there have also been a couple of bills in play this year. Virginia lawmakers heard the first ever state level bill that calls for 100% clean energy by 2035 in Virginia. This bill was introduced by environmental champion delegate Sam Razul, and when that bill eventually becomes law, not only are we going to have 100% clean energy sources by 2035, but it has an interim benchmark of 80% by 2027. The bill also includes a moratorium on the issuance of any permits for new fossil fuel infrastructure while providing for a just transition with a focus on environmental and economic justice communities. It did get a hearing this year. It was tabled indefinitely, but had significant support from all of the Democratic delegates on committees. And so we got a late start this year, but I think with our coalition partners, I know Andrea Miller from PDA is on the phone, we hope that Delegate Razul will come back with the bill next year. In New Jersey as well, a bill was introduced this year that has a mandate for 100% renewable energy by 2035, requires the state to develop the plan to get there. And we're working on amendments to make that bill a little bit more robust. We could have hearings as early as March. We're at the beginning of a 2-year legislative session, so there's plenty of time to work on the bill. And with a new governor who's declared his support for 100% clean energy, the time for setting these aggressive, ambitious goals in New Jersey is now. And then finally in New York, Assemblyman Dunley has put amendments in on a bill from last year. So we're starting the second year of a 2-year legislative session in New York. So the bill numbers that you see on the screen are from the bill from last year, and that those bills are currently being amended, and the new language should be available soon. But it develops New York must develop a plan under the bill to establish a 100% clean energy system by 2032. So the mandate and the timeline is a little more aggressive than the other bills. And in addition to electricity generating sector requirements, they have things like phasing out landfills, phasing out factory farms, and they have a requirement that all vehicles sold in state are to be zero carbon emissions or electric by 2025. So it's a little bit more of an economy-wide bill relative to the other bills we'll be hearing about. Getting these bills introduced is really only the first step in what undoubtedly will be a hard-fought battle, but polling consistently shows more and more people are concerned about climate change. So our collective challenge is to turn that concern into action, and it's going to take all of us, hundreds of others, together in a targeted and sustained campaign to overcome the power of oil and gas. But Janet and Liz are going to tell you about how you can engage your elected officials in support of the 100% bills. And so I just want to end by asking you all to join me in thanking Delegate Robinson and Representative Salazar for their unparalleled leadership on this critical issue. We ask that you raise your voices in support of all of these state bills. And I would end with a quote from President John F. Kennedy, who, when talking about the Apollo mission to the moon, which at the time we didn't know how we were going to do or how we would afford, he said, "We do it because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one that is we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win." And I think that sentiment is apt tonight. Together, we can bring about the clean revolution that we need to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, to create a rapid transition to clean energy now and for future generations. So with that, I'll end and turn it over to Mitch Jones. Let me try to unshare here.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And while she's doing that, I'll just jump in super quick to say, I know some folks have some questions about whether we are recording or what we're going to send out. So just so everyone knows, we are recording, and we will be sending this out in an email after the webinars, and along with any resources or things we mentioned during the call. So thank you. And with that, I will toss it over to Mitch.
Thank you, Saskia, and thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everybody, for getting on tonight. I apologize for the fact that I found out I was getting on the call 30 minutes ago, and so don't actually have prepared remarks. But I want to talk a little bit about the 100% bill here in Maryland, where it happens to have been over 80 degrees today on February 21st. And I noted, looking at some old Facebook feeds, that it was over 70 a year ago this past weekend as well. So it's an unusual weather pattern forming here, which I think lends credence to the urgency that we all know we have. Unfortunately, as we mentioned, Shane Robinson is stuck in committee. He actually sent me a photo. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but there he is, looking disgruntled in committee with his colleagues tonight. And I know he wanted to be on to talk about this bill because he has emphasized repeatedly that although Maryland is a relatively small state in terms of the global greenhouse gas emissions that we contribute, we can be a real leader in moving other states in this country and ultimately other countries in the world to 100% clean renewables. And so what we've been working on here in Maryland is a bill that dramatically rethinks the way that we approach renewable electricity policy. We've been working with colleagues in the Sierra Club, the Maryland Sierra Club, in Chesapeake Physicians for Social Responsibility and others. And I know some, I noticed looking at the participant list that some of those folks are on the phone tonight. We've been working with our partners and with Delegate Robinson to assure that we have a bill that is a truly robust move that is going to get us to clean renewables. Now here in Maryland, the two main sources that we potentially have for generating in-state renewable electricity are going to be solar and offshore wind. We don't have a lot of onshore wind in Maryland. There's already a little bit, but the capacity growth in Maryland is somewhat limited. And I know that Michelle mentioned the possibility of other sources, including geothermal, which unfortunately Maryland's geography doesn't lend a lot of support for electricity from geothermal. And we are hopeful that someday ocean tidal, which Maryland could take advantage of, will be available. But what we've been focusing on is creating a bill that's going to move us by 2035 to 100% clean renewable energy, and doing so in a way that doesn't harm lower income households. And that's why our bill is the 100% Clean Renewable Energy and Equity Act. So beginning with that equity piece, we found it to be vitally important to make sure that the transition is going to be something that is fair to all. And that's why we worked with some allies of ours in a coalition called Energy Advocates, who have been pushing a piece, which I believe is currently law in New Jersey, which will cap the cost of energy bills for low-income households at 6% of their income. So that's not a 6% cap on additions because of transitions to renewables. That's a base 6% cap. If you're from a low-income family, you're not going to be put in a position where you're going to have to be paying more than that. That's what has been defined as an equitable, fair amount for low-income households to pay. And so we think that that's a vital piece of our legislation because it assures that as we transition, which is going to cost money, as we transition to 100% clean renewable electricity, low-income folks aren't going to be unduly impacted. And in fact, when we did an analysis of our bill, we've shown that most low-income households will actually come out a little bit of ahead in this as opposed to being negatively impacted by it. So what our bill does beyond that is it says, let's stop using paper credits to count for renewable electricity. And let's instead say that every utility in this state has to buy electricity from clean sources, again defined very narrowly as solar, wind, and primarily ocean tidal, and say you have to actually buy electricity. You can't just go and buy a paper credit. Here in Maryland, we have a system where a lot of our so-called renewable energy comes from trash incineration. It comes from the burning of something called black liquor, which is a toxic byproduct of the paper making industry. A lot of it actually comes from buying paper credits from wind in Illinois, and it turns out this year, I think for the first time ever, North Dakota, that electricity is not coming here to Maryland. The people in North Dakota are getting the benefit of that electricity, and instead, utilities here in Maryland are buying those paper credits and saying that the coal that they're burning here in state no longer counts as coal because somehow magically they've purchased this paper credit and it has turned that coal into renewable energy. So we're saying, let's get beyond that system. Let's try to rethink that. And so what we've come up with is a different system for approaching this. And it's one that we know, because we've had the analysis done, can get us to 100% clean renewable electricity by 2035 and not greatly impact households. So what we're looking at is 2 new incentive programs. One for people who have solar. It's called the Megawatt Block Program. It's been used in New York, and Massachusetts has recently adopted it. And it gives a rebate to people, not only homeowners, but also larger scale utility that put in solar. So it's a in-state Maryland solar incentive to build out solar capacity here in Maryland. The second new program is a program that also Massachusetts has already adopted. New Jersey is moving towards, that is going to allow or actually require utilities to enter into long-term contracts with offshore wind providers. And between those 2 programs, both of which we developed actually in partnership with people from both the solar and the offshore wind industries, we believe that by 2035, 80% of the electricity consumed in Maryland will be generated from solar and wind generated in Maryland. Now, just for a comparison's sake, currently, Maryland imports 40% of the electricity that it uses. And that's going to be primarily coal and some other things from Pennsylvania and some stuff from Virginia. What we're saying is by 2035, with these incentive programs, we can get 80% of our electricity that we use here in Maryland from truly clean sources, solar and wind. And then we'll import 20% still, but that 20% also has to be from either solar or wind. And so 100% of the electricity that we consume here in Maryland will be from those clean sources. You know, we think that this is kind of a groundbreaking piece of legislation. As Michelle mentioned, we have the hearing coming up on March 5th. But it's a piece that we believe is a real roadmap for moving forward towards that renewable future, which we all know that we have to get to as quickly as possible. And in fact, we had a meeting with a wind company the other day that said, you know, if you give us the right incentives, we can actually get you enough offshore wind for 2029. So we're even beginning to hear from folks that maybe 2035 is a at the latest date and not a, you know, a drop dead aggressive date. And so those are the sorts of things we're talking about. We're talking about programs to protect low-income households to make sure that this transition is a just transition. We're talking about creating solar and wind energy here in Maryland, which, by the way, will create real jobs in Maryland. This program, on a conservative estimate, would create roughly 12,000 new jobs in Maryland by 2035. Those will be good paying jobs here in Maryland that are going to be able to support families and help grow our local economy. So we're very excited that Delegate Robinson, who again is just texting me that he's very sorry he can't be here because he's stuck in committee, but we're very excited by this bill. We're very eager to have our hearing on March 5th because we believe that this is the sort of visionary program that is going to help move not only Maryland, but other states and ultimately our country and other countries forward to that clean energy future that we know that we have to achieve as soon as possible.
Great. Thank you so much, Mitch. Thank you so much for that walkthrough on what's going on in Maryland. And just another quick reminder that we will again be emailing out the recording to tonight's webinar and any particular resources we reference in an email afterwards. So you can look out for that. And with that, I will throw it over to Representative Salazar.
See me? Okay. I'm Representative Joe Salazar. I represent House District 31 here in the state of Colorado, which is a small community called Thornton, which is north of Denver. And we have fracking happening right outside my House district. We live in a suburban area. I represent 75,000 people, and the area that oil and gas is looking to frack has around 10 to 15,000 people area. And it's become very upsetting for a lot of us for multiple reasons. Number one is the health, safety, and welfare of the public, of my constituents, of neighbors, but also they're really concerned about property values. And what they've seen happening is a massive drop of property values. Every time a fracking rig goes up in a suburban area, there's a massive drop in property values, up to 30% from what we're hearing. And there are some areas where people can't even sell their property as a result of these fracking rigs. This has become a major issue, and it's become a nonpartisan issue here in the state of Colorado. Back in November of this year, we had a Republican-led effort in a city called Broomfield, which is just west of Thornton, and Republicans and Democrats alike got together and developed an initiative to better control oil operations within the city and county of Broomfield. That was really just pivotal. We haven't had that kind of nonpartisan joining together of communities to fight against this industry. Here in Colorado, they're just extremely abusive, and they use our state statutes, as Supreme Court decisions interpreting those statutes to basically run roughshod over anybody who opposes them. So part of what I do as a legislator and as a civil rights attorney is I take a look at systems of oppression, and I figure out how to unpackage them and then put them back together with equity in mind and with fairness and justice, not only for people but also for our planet. And for the past 6 years, as I've been a legislator, I've been running bills against the oil and gas industry, bills to protect the health, safety, and welfare of our communities, bills to protect Mother Earth. And that's not any different than what's going on this year. Just recently, within the past 2 weeks, I got a bill out of the House of Representatives that oil and gas tried to kill. It's called the Martinez bill. The real name for it is Regulate Oil and Gas for Public Safety. And this bill was fashioned off of a rule that the Earth Guardians brought forward to the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission last year. And they asked the COGCC to implement this rule to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the environment as well as the public. And COGCC, which is a commission full of industry folks, by the way, refused to enact the rule. So the Earth Guardians sued them in court. They lost at the district court level on the appeal, but then they took it up to the Colorado Court of Appeals, and the Colorado Court of Appeals ruled in favor of the Earth Guardians, saying that when it comes to oil and gas permitting, it must be weighed against the health, safety, and welfare of the public and the environment, with deference given to the public and the environment. So I decided to codify the rule in the statute. I brought the bill I think it was about 3 weeks ago now, in committee, got it out of committee, got it to the House floor, caught the Republicans completely sleeping. They didn't even come to argue against the bill on second reading. We got it passed out of second reading with no opposition, and out of third reading with no opposition as well. And it's on its way over to a Republican-controlled Senate. And we're really concerned that they're going to go ahead and kill the bill. But we have a number of Republicans from all over the state willing to come and testify in favor of the bill. Things are changing. I guess that's the point, is that things are changing here in the state of Colorado. The other bill that I'm going to be bringing is the Oil and Gas Liability Act. It's a bill I brought a couple of years back because I was concerned about the number of earthquakes that Colorado was now starting to experience, as well as the number of explosions that were taking place out in the oil and gas fields just north of Denver. And at that time, when I brought the bill, I asked people the very question, what are you waiting for? Are you waiting for an explosion? Are you waiting for a loss of life? And I said that in 2015, and never did I know, and I guess we could have guessed it would have happened at some point. But in 2017, in May of last year, there was an explosion. There was an explosion that blew up a house in a city just north of where I live in Thornton called Firestone. Maybe you've heard about it in the news. And it took the lives of two people who lived in that house. And the wife who lived there, she was very wounded as a result of the explosion. And since May of 2017, we have had 14 other explosions or accidents along the Front Range of Denver. And so I decided to go ahead and bring back the Oil and Gas Liability Act, because this is exactly what this bill was supposed to protect. It's supposed to hold oil and gas accountable for their acts, and we have seen that the massive rate of natural resource harvesting by this industry has just resulted in safety being thrown aside. We've had massive oil leaks onto state roads from orphan wells. That's what they call them, orphan wells. We have had a couple of people die out in the fracking areas who were workers. We've had explosions at the same location over a 2-week period. We've had half of an entire city called Sterling in northeastern Colorado evacuated because of a natural gas leak. We had an entire football game evacuated as well in Greeley, Colorado, as a result of a natural gas leak. It's just over and over again. I mean, it's basically counting down the minutes to the next accident. So that's what we're doing in Colorado is trying to unpackage this oppressive system and try to figure out how to put it back together with equity in mind and renewable energies at 100% by 2035. As of this morning, we convened a stakeholder meeting with labor, with community organizations, as well as with conservation communities to sit down and talk about what does this look like for Colorado? How can we fashion the best piece of legislation that allows us to transition over to 100% renewables by 2035, helps create jobs at the same time, helps out labor, and helps out communities, and particularly those communities that are adversely affected, such as communities of color, which we see an awful lot of here in the state of Colorado. And so it's a Herculean task just to get everybody together. But for what we heard from labor as of this morning is that they are all on board to having these conversations. They know that they're coming, and they know they have to transition over. Part of looking at these systems, these oppressive systems, is understanding that sometimes this monster feeds out bits of food to people in order for it to survive. So, for example, oil and gas industry feeds out jobs to communities, and those people in those communities rely on those jobs for that industry to be kept here in the state of Colorado. So part of what we have to do is we have to unpackage that. We have to say, okay, how do we bring in renewable energy jobs into the state of Colorado? Good paying jobs that these people can transition over to. How can we set up an actual system of transitioning over where we have job training programs and retraining programs, move them out into the new renewable energy fields, and with as least disruption to the economy as possible. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is how do we engage our communities of color, in particular our poorer communities? How do we get them involved in this as well, to where they're not being adversely affected by higher energy rates, and number two, that they're enjoying the benefits of this new renewable energy job creation. We have to take a look at how Xcel Energy, which is our big energy supplier here in the metro area anyway, how do we get them on board with this, as well as our renewable energies suppliers? So there's an awful lot that we're working towards, but step by step we're going to get there. We're hoping to accomplish some great things within the next few months as we move forward, And it's only because of what all of you do that we're able to use a lot of your platforms as a launching point to some greater things here in the state of Colorado.
Great.
Please tell me you're still there. Okay, sweet.
Yep, we're still here. Thank you so much, Representative Salazar, for sharing that and what's going on in Colorado. And in case folks missed it the first few times I said, just want to make sure everyone knows, again, we're going to be emailing all of this out after the webinar, so you can keep an eye on your inbox for a recording and a wrap up of the webinar. And also, as we near the Q&A portion, just one more reminder, you can drop your questions in the Q&A using the button on the bottom of your screen. And if you're not on the video share, again, you can email us at help@fwaction.org. Again, that's help, HELP, at fwaction.org. And so now, to wrap up our panel, I will toss it over to Janet.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me? Am I loud enough?
Yes, thanks, Janet.
Okay, great. I'm Janet Curley, and as Michelle said, I belong to two faith organizations that are concerned with climate change. I've been asked to do three things tonight. Speak about the experience my church had with the Off Fossil Fuels Initiative, tell you about upcoming events, and let you know how you can get involved. The Off Fossil Fuels Initiative was kicked off last May by Food and Water Watch with a live streaming event, which individuals and organizations were invited to host so that a group of people could gather and watch it together and connect with each other to take action. My church co-hosted one of those live streaming events with another church. We posted our event on the Off Fossil Fuels map, and we were even able to log in to see who would be attending. It was very easy to use. A few days before our event, Food and Water Watch volunteers either called or texted several people who live in the vicinity of our two churches to invite them to attend. As a result of those calls, many more people came to our event, and we were able to connect with a broader range of environmental activists. The persons who attended because they received a call or a text added new energy and experience to our group, and we really felt that they bolstered our efforts to get elected officials to sign the Off Fossil Fuels pledge. Food and Water Watch has an extensive contact list of supporters, and with the help of volunteers, is capable of mobilizing a small army. I think the volunteers are great. I have made calls myself, and I have been a recipient of such calls. And I can tell you that I have always been happy to receive a call from a Food and Water Watch volunteer, letting me know what's happening and what part I can play. Some of you may even be on tonight's webinar because you received a call or a text from a Food and Water Watch volunteer. So that's really a testament to how effective they are. Okay, so I'd like to now turn to the upcoming events. There are events in the upcoming weeks that are occurring in 5 different states. I'll start with Colorado. On March 7th, there is a 100% renewable energy lobby day beginning at 8 a.m. at the Capitol in Denver. On March 15th, Food and Water Watch Colorado monthly volunteer meeting starts at 6 p.m. at the Food and Water Watch office in Denver. Moving to Maryland, February 24th, a rally at the Gubernatorial Candidate Forum in Baltimore, 1:30 p.m. at the Baltimore War Memorial. The following day, February 25th, another rally at another gubernatorial candidate forum, this one in Tacoma Park, starts at 6:15 p.m. at the Piney Branch Elementary School in Tacoma Park. Then on March 5th, a rally and committee hearing for a 100% renewable energy bill at 1 p.m. at the Lawyers Mall in front of the Maryland State House in Annapolis. On to the state of New Jersey. February 28th, Rally for Clean Energy at Rutgers University, 7 p.m. at the Cook Student Center, multi-purpose room at Rutgers, New Brunswick. On March 7th, a Rally for Clean Energy at Ramapo College, 7 p.m. at the Sharp Theater in the Berry Center at Ramapo College in Mahwah, New Jersey. Then in my home state of New York, February 22nd, Food and Water Watch Manhattan Monthly Volunteer Meeting, 7 p.m. at the Society for Ethical Culture on West 64th Street. On February 25th, a Sunday, there is an interfaith climate vigil outside Governor Cuomo's house. If you plan to attend, meet at the Mount Kisco train station at 3:30 p.m. On March 6th, there will be a film screening of To the Ends of the Earth. That's on Long Island at 7 p.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation at Shelter Rock in Manhasset. We will also be doing a weekly call-in day to the governor called Cuomo Mondays. To join the effort, you can text Cuomo Mondays to the following number, 69866. And in Virginia, on February 28th, a rally at 10 a.m. at the governor's office in Richmond. Now, in addition to participating in these meetings and actions that you've just heard about, there is another way to be involved. Even if you do not live in a state that was mentioned during this call, you can still support these campaigns. Food and Water Watch has central volunteer teams for the Off Fossil Fuels campaign, and anyone can join them. This campaign or other campaigns, anyone can join. When volunteers call supporters in the days before meetings, rallies, lobby days, and other events, the volunteers play a crucial role in increasing attendance. Political power is about numbers. The more people who attend events, the louder our voice is, and the harder it becomes for elected officials to ignore our message. I cannot stress enough the importance of these volunteers, especially in grassroots campaigns like the one at my church and our neighboring church. If you have some free time, even an hour a week, whatever time you have, you can still make a big impact by volunteering to call or text supporters. To do this, simply go to the following website, offfossilfuels.org, then click Get Involved and select Volunteer Online to get started. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Janet, for walking us through all those events and talking to us about the impact of the Off Fossil Fuels volunteers on your local events. Thank you so much. And again, attending those upcoming events is a great way to show your support for these bold campaigns and get more involved in your local area. And I will just add to Janet's great description of our volunteer teams that the shifts kind of fit around your own schedule, so you can fit in when it works for you. And our volunteers consistently report back how much they enjoy helping out with events like Janet's or talking to people around the country and be able to help them take quick action. So all of this, I know it was mentioned in the chat, but all of the links to the events that Janet mentioned so that you can sign up will be included in the email that we send out, as well as how to get involved in those text or call teams. Those teams just use real easy online tools from wherever they are, people from their home jumping in to help out on some of the campaigns Janet mentioned. And again, that website is offossilfuels.org in the Get Involved section. And there you'll be able to see more about each of the states Janet walked through, and the states we've heard about earlier in the webinar as well. So we're moving on. We're getting close to the end. So we just wanted to do a quick poll before we get to the Q&A. So you should see questions pop up on your screen if you're joining us on your computer. And the first question is, can you attend an in-person event in your state? We've got the Colorado, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Virginia in the coming weeks. And the second question is, can you volunteer to make calls or send texts to support these campaigns and others like them in the coming weeks? We've got some options to choose there. I'll give folks a second to finish up those questions. And a reminder as we hit the Q&A here in a second that if you have any questions for the panelists, you can pop those in the Q&A still below, and we'll get to as many as we can here. Great, so it looks like I think we're hitting the end here of the poll. So yeah, we've got a lot of folks who said that they would be able to, 40% of people attend a local event that they heard about, and a lot of folks, over 40%, are interested or are considering jumping in to volunteer on one of our central texting or calling teams. So thank you so much, everyone, for doing our poll. And I think we'll move quickly to a Q&A because we've just got a little bit of time left. We want to make sure we end on time. So we've got some questions that we've accumulated throughout the call. So I'm going to go ahead and kick that off. So I will start with a question that we got for Michelle. And the question is a carbon tax a market-based system? And why are we saying no to market-based systems? Michelle.
Hi, thanks, Saskia. That's a great question. So we do not consider a carbon tax a viable climate solution. There is a report on our website that looked at the BC carbon tax, which is often held up as the gold standard on Capitol Hill and elsewhere. And we looked at carbon taxes elsewhere in Europe and I think Australia. And what we found in BC was that actually during the tax years, carbon emissions went up. It did not reduce climate pollution at all. This isn't it wasn't a modeling exercise. The data is what the data is. They didn't go up. They also can be really regressive because the taxes are passed on from the fossil fuel industry, right? It's business as usual for Exxon. And people who spend a greater percentage of their income on things like home heating fuels or increased gasoline prices are usually low-income communities where it's just harder for them to pay those increased costs. So we are opposed to the regressive nature of carbon taxes. Also, it encourages continued reliance on fossil fuels because once you're generating pollution generating revenue from pollution, you're relying on that pollution. There's no incentive to reduce it if you're relying on the revenue that it produces. So we also are concerned about diverging away from real solutions. So we don't think that it's a solution at all. Again, we haven't found one that reduced climate pollution. We think they're regressive. and they're diversions that we don't need. When we have very little time, we need to be focusing on what works, which is mandatory pollution controls today on our fossil fuel industry while we transition as quickly as possible to clean renewable sources.
Great, thanks, Michelle, for taking that question. And I will ask the next question of Mitch. Renewables are such a small sliver of power generation now. How can we grow renewable energy that fast? Tossing it to Mitch.
All right, so yeah, that's a excellent question, and one that we get frequently, because when we have the good definition of renewables that we have, solar and wind, we find out that in a state like Maryland currently, we've got roughly 4% of our electricity coming from those sources, despite the fact that we claim roughly 13% comes from renewables. But there's a couple of things we can do. One, you can mandate it. You know, at the end of the day, we're not going to get to 100% renewables unless we pass bills that mandate 100% renewables. And so that's the number one thing. And that's what all of these bills ultimately would do. And it's an important step. We can't rely simply on the market and declining prices to lead us where we need to go. There are political forces fighting against us, many of whom have the name Coke involved. And so we need to pass these bills. We need to get these mandates. But in addition to that, when we looked specifically at Maryland, when we had the analysis of our bill and what it calls for done, what we found out, much to our surprise, and it really was to our surprise, was that the level of build out of solar and wind that we're calling for, and that can get us where we're going, and that was vetted by industry, is actually equal to or slightly less on a per capita basis to what other states have already accomplished or are already projecting. So our build out of solar would actually be on a per capita basis less than what California has already achieved. Our build out of offshore wind is already equal to or less than what Massachusetts is calling for. And industry says they can do it. That's the important thing. We're not just making this up. Industry has said, give us the right incentives, give us the right programs, and give us the mandate that says it has to be done, and we can achieve this. So we're very confident that this is a perfectly achievable goal for transitioning electricity. And of course, once we've transitioned electricity or have come very far in transitioning electricity, then the transition of transportation, which isn't in the Maryland bill, but is included in other bills like the bill in New York, and I noticed there were questions about that earlier, that can begin to take place. So, you know, yes, we're at a very low number right now, but the numbers are real. And I actually, just to mention Colorado for a second, I was in a meeting yesterday with the technical expert who did the analysis of our bill here in Maryland, and we were talking about the Colorado push for 100%. And as an offhanded comment, it hasn't been vetted, you know, real numbers, but as an offhanded comment, he's like, oh, Colorado would actually even be easier than what we've just figured out here in Maryland because of the capacity for onshore wind. Obviously, there's no offshore wind, capacity for onshore wind there. So I think that it's a realistic number. It's a number that experts are telling us, industry experts and academic experts are telling us is an achievable goal. And we feel confident that not only is it achievable, but also obviously we already know it's necessary. And so, you know, that's the answer to the question.
Great, thanks, Mitch, for taking that question. We've got time for one or two more. I will toss this over to Michelle. We've got a question that came in. How much power does the federal government have to block initiatives like the 100% clean renewable energy, an equity bill in Maryland, or regional greenhouse gases initiative? Does the EPA have any authority to restrict these state laws?
So that's also a really good question. These bills that we're talking about tonight really regulate in-state retail electricity markets. So states have the jurisdiction to do that. If a state tried to regulate a wholesale market, then they might run afoul of what's called the Commerce Clause, which gives Congress the right to regulate interstate commerce and exercise legislative powers over related state activities. So because the bills that we're talking about don't do that, states have the autonomy to enact them and implement them. I should mention though, because this has mostly been focused on state laws, that we do need a strong federal renewable energy bill as well. And there happens to be one that was introduced last week for people who don't know about it. We worked with many other groups, including a lot of the co-sponsors of this webinar, Progressive Democrats of America, National Nurses United, People Demanding Action. And we worked with them and Representative Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii to create the Off Fossil Fuels for a Better Future Act that was introduced last year. It's House Bill 3671. Representative Gabbard just sent out a press release this week talking about how it's gained a lot of momentum. There's 28 congressional co-sponsors in addition to herself, over 400 endorsements from a variety of organizations. And this legislation is going to put the United States as a whole on a pathway to replace fossil fuels with 100% clean energy by 2035 with an interim benchmark of 80% by 2027. It requires all motor vehicles, rail lines, and train engines to be electric by 2035. It strips away fossil fuel subsidies, enacts a moratorium on the approval of fossil fuel projects, and bans fossil fuel exports in addition to raising revenue for just transition. So it's a really strong piece of legislation. As Representative Gabbard herself has said, though, we need to continue to put pressure on members of Congress and congressional candidates to support that bill, but our greatest opportunities for gains in the short term are really at the local and state level, which is why a lot of our energy and the energy of our coalition partners, is focused there.
Great, thanks, Michelle. And with that, we've come to the hour. So I'll just say, wrap it up and say thank you again so much to everyone for joining tonight. We love everyone to get involved. If you're in one of the states we mentioned, we'll follow up with instructions on how you can do that. And if you're not in one of those states, again, the great texting and calling teams that Janet talked about, we'd love to get you plugged into one of those. Once more, wanted to thank our allies and partners that we've worked with on these campaigns and who've also shared this webinar with their networks, especially Progressive Democrats of America, People Demanding Action, National Nurses United, and People's Action. Thanks so much for spending time with us this evening. We couldn't do any of this work without such an incredible network of activists and allies. So that's it for this evening. Thanks for joining, and on to the clean energy revolution. Have a good night, everyone.